Hi everyone, my name is Daša Stevović and I'm conducting this interview on behalf of radical feminist group Femrevolt. Today I'll be talking to Jennifer Lahl, founder and president of Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. And thank you for joining me today, Jennifer.
Thank you. It's good to be able to talk with you through technology.
Yeah. I'll let you introduce yourself a bit further now before moving to questions.
Yeah, I think I'll just add a little bit briefly as I was a nurse and I worked in clinical hospital nursing for about 20 years, mostly pediatric critical care. And so a lot of the work I do around assisted reproduction and surrogacy and egg donation, I take a sharp critical look at the medical risks and harms. So that's more the approach that I take in my activism, speaking out against the exploitation of women and children.
Thank you. I'll start by asking you more about, obviously, surrogacy. Since you focused on surrogacy and the majority of your work from medical, ethical, and legal perspectives, can you, for start, tell me more about the medical process of surrogacy, the health risks it entails for women and children, and feel free to be as detailed as possible, because I think understanding the medical process behind it gives us the ground for talking about ethical and legal problems further.
Yeah, well, you don't even have to look very far if you just do a quick internet search on the advertisements that's placed out there trying to recruit women to be surrogates. There's never any mention of the drugs that they have to take, the health risks, the complications. So I think that's just a problem from just the marketing and the recruitment, is women are not informed. As a nurse, I'm really a big fan of informed consent, so people know what they're getting into and what their risks are. So, they're already starting out by hiding the fact that this is dangerous and risky. These women, in order to prepare their uterus to receive an embryo that's transferred into them, and the embryo can be from a heterosexual couple using their own egg and their own sperm. It can be from a same-sex gay couple that's used an egg donor. And the sperm from one of the men in the the homosexual same-sex couple, or it could be, single men also. And so they have to take a lot of hormones, they have to take a lot of injections, fertility drugs, in order to prepare their uterus to be hospitable to this embryo when it's transferred, or embryos, because often it's the case that multiple embryos are transferred. What we're just now seeing in the medical literature is that that woman's body immediately rejects this foreign embryo. If you think of like organ donation, if you needed a kidney, you seem like a lovely woman, I could say, yes, sure, I'll give you one of my kidneys, but we have to do a lot of testing first to make sure you're not going to reject that kidney. And if we're not matched, I can't give you it's a foreign embryo. And so what we're seeing in some really good studies in the medical literature is that surrogate mothers' pregnancies are complicated by gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, maternal hypertension. And as a nurse, I know, and many of your listeners will probably know, that if a pregnant woman is in a high-risk pregnancy, the babies are also at risk. We see high rates of cesarean section delivery. Review for publication. And what we did in our research is we found women who had done at least one gestational surrogacy and had at least one of their own children. So we compared their pregnancy experiences, and it was overwhelmingly that when you compared their own pregnancies with their own children, their surrogate pregnancies were consistently high risk. preterm labor, premature babies being born, high rates of C-section. So all those complications are there. And when you look at the debate and the argument around surrogacy is we have to let women do this, it's their bodies, it's their choice, if they want to help somebody. But we don't do that in medicine. We don't let people help other people with their bodies and make decisions that put them at risk. And I'm in California, so I'm speaking to you from California right now. We've had 2 surrogate mothers die from surrogate pregnancy complications. And one of the surrogates just really recently, like about 6 months ago, died. And she was doing the second surrogacy for the same couple. They came back because she had a baby for them. And they're like, well, we were ready for a sibling, you know, a brother or sister, would you do it again? And she did, and she died. She had a relatively uncomplicated pregnancy, and she died giving birth to the child, the surrogate baby. The baby didn't die. We had a surrogate mother in Idaho, and she was carrying twins for a couple in Spain. Because all of surrogacy is illegal in Spain. So people from Spain come to the United States, and the surrogate in Idaho died and the twins died. And it was a real high risk, complicated pregnancy. She had placental abruption, where the placenta just pulls away abruptly from the uterus, and it's this massive hemorrhaging. And so if that doesn't happen literally in the hospital, there's little chance of saving those lives because there's so much massive bleeding. So these are things that our government's not looking at when they're looking at passing surrogacy legislation. You know, New Zealand right now is looking at passing a big surrogacy reform piece of legislation, and they asked for public comment. So I went online to the New Zealand government and filled out their form. And every single question was about, how are we going to regulate this? There was never a question of, should we just not do this? It was, we're going to do it. And these, you know, here are the questions. Do you think we should take out the money? Do you think we should control how much people are paid? Do you think we should look at how the advertisements have to be placed? I mean, it never once addressed any of these really serious health risks, which I think is really unfortunate. But this big fertility, this big industry, and we can talk about the money side of it, is driving this.
I'd love to focus on the money side of this. I just have a short question before that. Can you tell me something more about the differences between altruistic surrogacy and surrogacy that's through contracts and clinics?
Yeah, so there's a couple of phrases that we use. There's altruistic, which means the women are not paid. They're just doing it like organ donation. It's truly a charitable, you know, gift. And then there's the commercial side of it. So you're entering into a legal contract where you are being paid, contracted to perform a job. And the job in this case is a pregnancy, and that you're to surrender the child at birth. Usually, even if it's an altruistic surrogacy, at least in the United States, there's still a contract, because the intended parents want to make sure that that baby is given to them. So, and so the contract assures that when the baby's born, the surrogate can't change her mind. You know, it's gotten so ridiculous, like in my state, in California, before the surrogate is even pregnant with the surrogate pregnancy, she signs away her maternal rights, so that when the baby is born in California, the surrogate mother's name never even goes on the birth certificate, because she's already severed those maternal rights. And then the other phrase you'll hear sometimes, you know, I said gestational surrogate versus traditional, and I don't like the word traditional because I don't think it's traditional. But the gestational surrogate is literally carrying somebody else's baby. But the traditional surrogate, and that still happens, traditional surrogacy still happens, it's the surrogate's genetic child. So it's her egg, but the sperm is from somebody else. So you'll see traditional and gestational and altruistic and commercial. And one of our films called Breeders, a subclass of women, in that film, we intentionally interviewed surrogates that were altruistic surrogates, surrogates that were commercial surrogates, surrogates that did traditional surrogacy, surrogates that did surrogacy for friends, family, because you hear that a lot. We'll let her have a baby for her sister or her best friend, or for strangers. And every single one of those women had pregnancy-related complications, were exploited, you know, regret their decision. So any way you slice it, you can't get rid of these kind of problems. You can't say, well, we'll only allow altruistic surrogacy, because money doesn't cause the health complications. It's not the money that puts a woman's health at risk. It's actual pregnancy. Or you can't say, well, let her help her sister. Well, the surrogates in the United States who died could have died if they were having a baby for their sister or their best friend. So you can't control for those kind of, problems and risks.
Yeah, so technically, I mean, health doesn't rely on the goodwill or the presence of the contract.
Yeah, and the baby doesn't care. The baby doesn't care if they were paid or not paid, or there's the whole issue of bonding. As a pediatric nurse, we're really concerned with pregnant women bonding, during the pregnancy as well as after the child is born. And I always use the example in California. I have a dog, and when our little puppy was born, by law, we had to wait 8 weeks to bring the puppy to our house because it's animal cruelty. And it's seen as inhumane treatment of a puppy. And by law, the only way you can take a newborn puppy immediately at birth is because, the mother dog died giving birth, or the mother dog is too sick, to care for the puppy or to nurse the puppy. So, there's some exceptions in the law for when a newborn dog can be removed. But in surrogacy, we don't care. We just take this baby straight out of this mother's womb and give it to sometimes strangers, that are, in a different country, Spain or France.
That brings me to my next question. There is a very interesting documentary type film that CBC did that you just mentioned, Big Fertility, where it's all about the money. So my question here is, where does the money trail lead? Who profits the most in this industry? It's all about the money, and where does the money actually go?
Yeah, there is several roads that lead to the people that profit. First is obviously the industry, the clinics, the fertility agencies. They're sort of the brokers. They're the ones that are recruiting women to donate, sell their eggs, which is also another very, very risky procedure, or to rent their womb. So the whole broker middleman, they are the ones that set up the flashy website with the cute little babies and everybody's smiling and come and make a bunch of money. Fertility doctors make a lot of money. This is a very lucrative field of medicine to be in, and they offer like all kinds of add-on services. Do you want, in Big Fertility, one of the couples that the woman was a surrogate for wanted a boy and a girl, so they paid extra to have a boy embryo created and a girl embryo. So the fertility doctors, the lawyers who actually sign and execute the legal contracts, make a lot of money at the signing of the contract. And the big pharma, because I mentioned that without drugs, the women who are either donating their eggs or renting their wombs have to take a lot of medication. So those are sort of the big people, and it is an issue of who can afford surrogate pregnancy. It's the wealthy. And who is being the surrogate, or who is selling their eggs, or selling their eggs and being the surrogate, the people who need the money. So that's clearly an ethical and legal problem and a medical problem that we have. The haves can buy and the have-nots have to sell.
About the issue of poverty, that most of surrogate mothers do come from poverty, and most of the buyers of children are actually wealthy. We are often hearing about high-profile cases and famous people renting a surrogate mother. I have, and can you tell me something more about what was happening during COVID? Because I think that's a very specific situation that has shown in some sense what this industry is really about, especially when a lot of babies were left in Ukraine because the prospective buyers, aka parents, just didn't show up.
Well, Big Fertility depends on the whole reproductive tourism industry, because we don't have, global international laws that prohibit this, so where one country doesn't allow it, another country does, or one country allows some form of it. There's a debate in Israel because, Israel allows heterosexual couples, to have surrogacy, but not same-sex couples, but that law is changing. So, this whole patchwork of the legal landscape encourages tourism. And what we saw during COVID and the pandemic and the world basically just locked down was, surrogate mothers were all over the world in countries where this is permitted, who gave birth, and the intended parents who were outside of whatever country that surrogate was in couldn't travel to pick up their babies. So we had women in the United States that were carrying babies for couples in Asia. You saw just the outrage of what happened with, Ukraine, where they showed just pictures of, babies in crib after crib after crib, and, these rooms full of just cribs of all these newborn babies. And you have to wonder, to sort of gets back to the humanity and the cruelty of, these children. And then what happens, we have a woman in the United States who's will basically have the baby for almost the first year of its life. And then all of a sudden it's going to be able to be taken to Asia. And for 1 year, this baby has only heard English and it hasn't heard, the Asian language. And, and that separation of that bond at such an important age, when you're just a 1-year-old and you're taken from the only family or only mother you've known since birth, or before birth, because you were in that woman's womb, for the 9-month pregnancy. And I just think that's this, I think we'll see the consequences, the negative consequences of what happened to surrogacy during the pandemic because of this, this fact that children could not be immediately taken home to the intended parents. But, it's for all those many, many reasons I oppose surrogacy. I always tell people, even if you're a strong feminist who wants to say things like it's her body, it's her choice, I say, read a surrogate contract. This woman has no choice. I mean, she's told by contract who she can sleep with, what she can eat, if she can take a vacation, if she can pierce her ears or wear perfume. One surrogate contract I have, she was told for the 9 months of pregnancy, she had to eat a vegan diet. So there's all these controls during the 9 months, and it's very punitive. So if you don't obey, if you don't follow the rule, you're in breach of your contract. And we had 2 surrogates in California that signed contracts that had, the contracts always have abortion termination language or what they call selective reduction. So reducing down the number of babies. And both of these surrogates signed contracts agreeing that if asked, they would either terminate the pregnancy or reduce down the pregnancy. Then they found themselves to be pregnant with triplets. And both the intended parents for these 2 separate surrogates wanted one of the women to reduce down to 1 baby and one of the women to reduce down to 2. And both of these surrogates didn't want to do that because there was nothing wrong with the babies. There was no indication that maybe they were disabled, Down syndrome, any kind of medical problems. It was just for the mere fact that the intended parents didn't want 3 babies. And so we had to scramble to find them lawyers, because they were in breach of their contract because they agreed to do this, but then when faced with having to make that decision, they just couldn't. So, I think there's no free choice here, and there's so much money that's corrupting choice anyway. We know that we're not making free choices when we need the money.
Yeah, I understand. I have a series of not that easy questions now, but I have to ask you to briefly turn off your camera and turn it on again because you're frozen. And we're back. Okay. Right. Okay. So, well, bearing in mind that you are in the part of the world where this is no longer a hypothetical debate and things have gone way further than they should, and bearing in mind that I'm currently in the Balkans, specifically Serbia, where this is not yet a part of everyday debate or anything politically happening right now, but we have a public debate on surrogacy every once in a while. and we're expecting to have it again if there are any changes to civil code soon. So my first question is, before I ask you the tough one, what should we do? What do you do? What does the CBC do, and what do you do to fight this on international level? How do you try to talk to the leaders of the international community and so on?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. One is, our work is mostly around the space of what we call in the United States, we're an educational nonprofit organization. So we're always trying to educate people, and we educate people through making documentary films. We have a podcast called Venus Rising, where we regularly interview as our guests surrogate moms who had complications or egg donors who had problems. We testify at legislative hearings, to try to educate lawmakers about the realities, the truth of surrogacy, not just the image in the advertisement. So kind of in all of that space, I write all the time. So whether it be for magazines or print articles. So speaking, traveling, I've been at the United Nations 3 times, the UN twice in New York City, and then the UN in Geneva, Switzerland, speaking about the exploitation of women and the impact to women and children, especially in really, really impoverished, countries. So it's, it's sort of a multi-pronged effect of speaking and making movies and telling women's stories, and then doing the research, because we need research, which is the data. Because a lot of times lawmakers, you can testify at a hearing and they'll have 3 surrogates that nothing went wrong. It was just wonderful. And then you have your surrogates that it was horrible. They almost died, all these complications. So it's kind of a story. But if you can have data that says the data shows that these are really risky pregnancies. Now, these surrogates that you have speaking that had wonderful, they were lucky. It's like the smoker who doesn't get lung cancer. So they rolled the dice, but they were fortunate in that they didn't die or they didn't have any health risks, only because the luck of the draw, because the data shows these are high risk pregnancies. And I think in a country like yours, where this isn't set in stone, like in California, I hate to have no hope, but I have no hope that we'll be able to, stop surrogacy in my state. But in a country like yours, start educating, start organizing, as your feminist groups. So whatever you can do to, develop relationships with the media, develop relationships with lawmakers, your government, but start educating people and organizing, so that if you need to really push back on like what is happening in New Zealand, you're not at ground zero. You're already organized, and you already have, your fact sheets and your talking points and things that you can go out into your communities and talk about.
One more a tough question for you. Since we can see now that surrogacy is being more and more framed as a human rights issue and a sad story about how couples should be able to have children if they're not, especially being framed as an LGBT issue. How do we fight this on this kind of non-practical level, this debate level? How do we, example being, I am also homosexual, I don't feel as if I am supposed to be granted a child, that I can buy a child. How do we fight this reframing of women's oppression as a human rights issue?
Yeah, I think, that is hard, because you do have, in the United States, I'm not sure in your country, but here, the especially gay men, they're very wealthy. So they have a lot of power. We have a lot of very famous celebrities that are gay, that have surrogate, children. So that is really hard. But I think we just have to push back and say, nobody has a right to a child. You don't have a right to another person's body in order to have a child. I don't have a right to make you give me your kidney, so I don't have to be on kidney dialysis or die because I need a kidney transplant. In the United States, every 13 minutes, somebody dies waiting on a transplant list for an organ. And we don't say, oh, let's just start buying and selling organs and taking them off death row people, because we see the rights and the dignity of people that I shouldn't be the spare parts for, be told I have to give something up. So we just have to push back on the language of this right to a child. You have a right to your own child. If you and your partner have your own child with your own body, your own DNA, that's your child. You have a right to that, but you don't have a right to somebody else's body to have a child. Maybe we just have to reframe it more as a women's exploitation issue, and that this is exploitative and harmful and dangerous to women. And how can your right to a child be okay to put me in danger and harm's way? And what are the rights to these children? Like I say, who are taken away from perhaps the only mother that they've known for 9 months or longer if they're stranded because of COVID. Who's looking out for the best interests of children? When you're born of surrogacy, I've interviewed one woman who was born of a commercial surrogacy arrangement, and her first baby picture is in the lawyer's office, where her surrogate mother is handing her over to the intended parents, and the surrogate's receiving a check for $10,000 for the final payment for the baby. I mean, that's her first baby picture. It's not just some cute little baby with a little teddy bear, posed all cute for its baby, baby pictures. And she's very estranged from her intended mother that she was raised by and the surrogate mother, because she speaks out against this. Her blog is, a product of surrogacy. She's a product. She was bought and sold.
Yeah, I understand. I'd like to ask you at the end if there is anything that you feel I haven't asked and is important to cover, and if not, I'd like you to just introduce the Stop Surrogacy Now statement and ask people to sign it and to watch the films on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have anything else to add, because I think we've covered a lot. For obviously the listeners, maybe we'll have questions and they can email you or contact me. I don't mind. But yeah, I was really grateful that you reached out. I think you reached out to me, was it, or did I reach out to you?
I reached out to you for the signing of the petition, and then you reached out to me to talk.
So, and thank you so much, because you have translated it for us, because we're trying to get as many countries at once in their own language. So you've done a great job in translating that statement. So people, please go to Stop Surrogacy Now, and read the petition. And if you agree, sign it. We don't ask for a lot of information when you actually sign it, but so a lot of the information is optional. But if you can actually put in your country when you sign it, it's great, because then if you want to organize an event, say in your country, we can pull out we can filter the people that signed it from your country, and then provide that information to you, so you can notify them that you're organizing an event or something. But all of our we have 2 films on surrogacy and 2 films on egg donation. And I think both of them are important, because, as I said, gay men overwhelmingly, take eggs from one woman in a womb from another woman. So, and those are both equally risky and dangerous. But we have a YouTube channel, which is the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. And all of our films are available to watch for free. And many of them are in different languages: French, Spanish, Italian. Exploitation, our film on egg donation, is even in Japanese. So we're hopeful that other people will want to translate them into a language that we can subtitle, just to help get the information out, because most people just aren't aware that this is dangerous. They think it's somebody doing something nice and helping somebody, and it is doing something nice, helping, but it's very, very dangerous.
Yeah, I understand. I'd like to thank you again for answering my call for this interview, and I'd like to thank you for everything you're doing in this fight.
Yeah, well, thank you too. We're all in this together.
Thank you, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Wonderful.
I'll stop the recording now.